The daughter of a widowed millionaire became furious when she discovered that her father had adopted a street boy. With the intention of abandoning the boy, she decides to do something, but then this happens. Sophia grew up surrounded by all the luxury that money could buy. Her mansion, nestled in the most exclusive hills of the city, was a modern palace of marble and glass, with gardens that seemed to stretch infinitely. Every detail there reflected wealth and power, from the crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling to the rare works of art that adorned the walls. But despite all the splendor around her, the mansion was cold, almost impersonal, a reflection of the emptiness hidden beneath Sophia's seemingly perfect life. From a young age, Sophia learned that she could have anything she wanted with a simple snap of her fingers. Sports cars, priceless jewelry, clothes from the most renowned brands, nothing was out of her reach. Spoiled by everyone around her, she believed that the world revolved around her desires. Her life was a constant parade of superficial pleasures, where momentary satisfaction was the rule, and selfishness, her most faithful companion. However, all this abundance did not fill the void left by the absence of her mother, who died when Sophia was just a child. Her father, Richard, a successful and always busy businessman, tried to compensate for the lack of affection with expensive gifts and extravagant trips, but nothing could replace the maternal presence. Conversations between father and daughter were brief and formal, limited to discussions about new ventures or social events, never touching on the deep feelings that both avoided. Richard, despite his influence and wealth, seemed like a distant figure to Sophia. He was a man of few words, with an imposing presence, but emotionally absent. To Sophia, her father was more a source of power and money than a safe haven. She admired his determination, but also secretly blamed him for not being present in the moments when she needed him most. The relationship between the two was superficial, built more on social conventions than genuine affection. Deep down, Sophia felt lonely, but her vanity and pride would never allow her to admit it. Instead, she masked her loneliness with luxurious parties, surrounding herself with friends who cared more about her status than her as a person. But at the end of each party, when the lights went out and the music stopped, the silence in the mansion became deafening. It was in that silence that Sophia was confronted with the reality of her life, a solitary existence, wrapped in wealth, but devoid of true love. The house, though grand, was not a home. Sophia never knew what it meant to have a united family. The affection that was lacking in her life was replaced by objects and luxuries that, over time, lost their luster in her eyes. And so, she lived her life, always searching for something that even she didn't know how to define, but believed she could find in material things. Each new desire fulfilled was just another brick in the wall she built around herself, isolating herself more and more from the real world. On a cold winter afternoon, Richard, the imposing millionaire with an always serious demeanor, was walking through the streets of downtown, something he rarely did. He was absorbed in his thoughts when he saw a scene that deeply moved him. A boy, no older than 12, was sitting on the sidewalk, huddled in a corner, dressed only in rags. The boy had his eyes fixed on the ground, trying to shield himself from the cold wind that cut through the skin. Richard stopped, watching him for a moment, and something inside him broke. Perhaps it was the boy's empty and hopeless look, or maybe the guilt for all the times he had seen similar scenes and simply walked by. This time, however, he couldn't ignore it. The decision to approach Lucas was almost instinctive, as if something beyond his consciousness was guiding him. Richard, used to big negotiations and calculated decisions, felt an urgency at that moment that he couldn't explain. Kneeling beside the boy, he offered him a hot coffee and began to talk. Lucas' words were few, but each carried an enormous weight. He talked about nights without a roof, the constant hunger, and the loneliness that followed him at every corner. Richard, for the first time in years, truly listened. By the end of that conversation, he knew what he had to do. Richard decided to adopt Lucas, almost as a reflection of a new mission that had arisen within him. For a man so accustomed to control, this decision seemed like a leap into the dark. It wasn't just about getting Lucas off the street, but about trying to redeem himself from his own failures as a father. Adopting Lucas was, for Richard, a way to reconnect with the humanity he felt he had lost over years of success and isolation. It was a way to give the boy a chance at life, and at the same time perhaps to find a part of himself that had been lost. When he announced the decision to Sophia, however, the reception was anything but warm. Sophia, who was used to being the absolute center of her father's life, heard the news with a mix of shock and disdain. Sitting on the luxurious living room sofa, with an incredulous look, she almost laughed at the thought that her father might be serious. "You want to adopt a street boy? Why?" The words came out of her mouth with a hint of sarcasm. To Sophia, the idea seemed absurd, almost offensive. How could someone like Lucas, so far removed from her reality, have a place in their lives? Richard, on the other hand, remained firm. He knew that Sophia would not understand immediately. "Because he needs us, Sophia. And perhaps we need him more than we imagine." His voice, calm, carried a conviction that Sophia was not used to hearing. The phrase echoed in her mind, but instead of awakening compassion, it fueled a feeling of discomfort. What could this boy offer them that she, his daughter, could not? As the days passed, Lucas' presence in the mansion began to change the family dynamics. Richard showed attention in a way that Sophia didn't recognize. He spent time with Lucas, teaching him simple things that Sophia had always taken for granted, like reading a book by the fireplace or enjoying a family dinner. The initial relationship between Sophia and Lucas was marked by an invisible but solid barrier. To Sophia, Lucas was an intruder, someone who threatened the balance she believed she controlled. And to Lucas, Sophia was an intimidating, almost unreachable figure, surrounded by everything he had never had, and that now seemed within his reach, but always out of his understanding. However, Richard was determined. Lucas would be part of the family, and he believed deep down that somehow this decision would bring the redemption he so desperately sought. But for Sophia, Lucas' adoption was not a new opportunity, but a threat. She saw in her father's actions not the generosity he intended, but rather a mistake that could come at a high cost. Sophia began to realize that Lucas' presence in the mansion was not just temporary, as she had initially imagined. What once seemed like a passing charity on her father's part was now turning into something much more serious. The attention Richard gave the boy was unlike anything Sophia had witnessed before. Richard, who had always been a busy and reserved man, seemed to open up in a new and unexpected way with Lucas. It was as if suddenly the boy had become the focus of all his energy and affection, and this sparked a flame of concern within Sophia. Over time, this concern began to turn into something darker. Sophia began to fear that Lucas might be occupying a space that, by rights, was hers. What if the boy ended up winning Richard's heart in a way she never could? And what if, in the future, her father decided to divide the inheritance equally, or worse, favor Lucas? These questions haunted Sophia's mind, fueling a growing sense of insecurity. Every time she saw her father laughing with Lucas or teaching him something, the discomfort inside her increased. Jealousy and insecurity mixed in a bitter cocktail that Sophia drank daily. Until then, she had always been the center of attention, the untouchable princess of her father's kingdom. Now, however, there was a new player on the board, someone who seemed to directly threaten her position. The idea that her inheritance, the security she had always taken for granted, might be at risk became unbearable. Like a growing shadow, these thoughts pursued her every moment, robbing her of sleep and consuming her peace. Richard, on the other hand, seemed completely unaware of the storm brewing inside Sophia. He continued to treat Lucas with an affection Sophia had never known, and this reality ate away at her inside. The nights when Richard sat with Lucas to tell stories or help him with his lessons were the most painful for Sophia, because they reminded her of everything she had always wanted, but never received. It was as if the boy was stealing something she had never had, but had always thought should be hers. The emotional distance between Sophia and her father only grew, and Lucas, unknowingly, became the symbol of this growing barrier. Sophia began to avoid family conversations, preferring the silence of her room, where thoughts of loss and betrayal grew into a whirlwind of unresolved feelings. This situation created deep discontent in Sophia. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a visceral fear that everything she had built, or rather, everything that had been built for her, was about to crumble. Every gesture of affection Richard showed Lucas was like a stab, reminding her that she had never had that. In her heart, sadness began to turn into something sharper, a desire to protect what was hers, at any cost. Determined not to lose her place, Sophia began to imagine ways to reverse the situation. Her mind, once filled with insecurities, was now focused on a single idea. Lucas needed to leave their lives. Driven by a mixture of jealousy and despair, Sophia began to devise a dark plan. She needed to get rid of Lucas once and for all, and the only way she found to do that was to remove him from her world definitively. During sleepless nights, as she walked down the vast hallway of her mansion, she nurtured the idea of abandoning him in a place where no one would ever find him, a place that symbolized the end of the threat he posed to her. Her heart, once only full of insecurities, was now hardened, determined to do whatever it took to protect what was hers. Every detail of the plan was carefully thought out, as if it were a strategic task and not an act of cruelty. Sophia began to study maps of the region, looking for a place that was both isolated and dangerous, something that would discourage any attempt by Lucas to return. She remembered an old dirt road that led to a dense, long-abandoned forest, a place she had visited as a child with her mother. The location, shrouded in mist and silence, seemed like a portal to another world, where civilization was just a distant memory. It seemed perfect for what she had in mind. The days leading up to the execution of the plan were a real test for Sophia. Every time she looked at Lucas, a mix of guilt and justification took hold of her. "It's necessary," she told herself repeatedly, trying to silence any trace of compassion that might arise. She watched him closely, studying his movements, his habits, every detail that would help her put her plan into practice. Lucas, for his part, remained unaware of the storm brewing around him, believing that Sophia was just a distant figure but not hostile. The choice of day was meticulous. Sophia waited until Richard was busy with a business trip, knowing that any interference on his part could ruin her plans. The weather seemed to conspire in her favor. The forecast was for stormy weather, which would make the environment even more desolate. She prepared everything carefully, making sure she would leave no traces. Every move was calculated, from the moment she would invite Lucas for a walk to the moment she would leave him in that desolate place with no chance of return. Deep down, Sophia fought against a growing sense of dread. Every time she thought about what she was about to do, a knot formed in her stomach, but she quickly stifled it. "He doesn't belong here," she repeated to herself, trying to turn her fear into determination. Her mind was a battlefield where what was left of her humanity fought against the selfishness that consumed her. However, the closer the day came, the more she convinced herself that there was no other way. Lucas was a threat that needed to be eliminated. When the day finally arrived, Sophia was ready. She chose the most comfortable outfit, something that wouldn't attract attention, and did everything to appear natural. She called Lucas, with the sweetest voice she could muster, saying she wanted to show him a special place, a secret refuge where she used to go as a child. Lucas, with his innocent and bright eyes, accepted the invitation with a shy smile, suspecting nothing. To him, it was a rare chance to get closer to Sophia, someone he had always considered unattainable. To Sophia, it was the moment to end her torment. As they approached the place, the road became narrower and rougher. The dense trees around them seemed to form a dark tunnel, isolating them from the rest of the world. The tension in the air was palpable, but Lucas, still confident, continued to follow Sophia, unaware that this trip was a one-way journey. As they moved forward, Sophia felt her heart beat faster, adrenaline taking over her body. With each step, she approached the final decision, struggling to keep the mask of tranquility while everything inside her screamed in despair. Sophia's luxury car slid silently along the dirt road, the sound of stones under the tires the only noise breaking the oppressive silence of the afternoon. Lucas sat next to her in the passenger seat, watching the landscape with a mix of curiosity and enthusiasm. Lucas, unaware of the gravity of the situation, asked some questions about Sophia's childhood, about how she felt in that place. Sophia responded with monosyllables, her mind focused on the cruel task she was about to execute. Every smile she forced, every word she uttered, seemed to weigh like a stone on her chest. When they finally reached the clearing, Sophia parked the car and sat in silence for a moment, trying to control her breathing. She knew that this would be the last place where she would see Lucas, and although she was determined, part of her could hardly bear the pain it caused her. Lucas, unaware of Sophia's hesitation, jumped out of the car excitedly, exploring the terrain with a childlike joy that tore at her heart. He ran to a large tree pointing to a bird's nest and commented on how that place seemed like a magical refuge. His words were a subtle blow, reminding Sophia of how young, vulnerable, and trusting he was. Sophia watched him in silence, the weight of guilt growing inside her like a furious tide. The clearing, which had once seemed the perfect place to carry out her plan, now seemed to suffocate her. The environment, which was supposed to be her ally, turned against her, with every shadow and every whisper of the wind sounding like a judgment. Lucas, for his part, continued to explore, unaware of the danger, content to share that moment with someone he was beginning to consider a friend. Each passing second made the situation more unbearable for Sophia. She walked towards Lucas, trying to ignore the turmoil in her mind. He smiled at her, with no idea that his life was hanging by a thread. "Sophia, did you used to come here with your mother?" he asked with genuine curiosity. The question hit Sophia like a dagger, bringing up memories she was desperately trying to keep buried. She forced a smile and nodded, but her voice failed when she tried to respond. The weight of what she was about to do almost crushed her, but she knew she couldn't turn back. Not now. As Lucas continued to explore the clearing, Sophia felt panic grow. What once seemed like a simple plan now turned into an emotional prison from which she couldn't escape. Every step Lucas took, every time he called her name, increased the weight of guilt. The idea of leaving him there, alone, unprotected, in such a gloomy place, began to seem unbearable. She knew he trusted her, that he believed in her goodness. And that trust, that tenuous bond he was beginning to form with her, made everything even more terrible. Deep down, Sophia already knew she was about to cross a line from which she could never return. She moved away for a moment, pretending to be exploring the area, but in reality, trying to find the strength to carry out the plan. The sound of the forest, once so serene, now seemed like a lament, echoing her own hesitation. Still, with a heavy heart and quickened breath, Sophia knew the decision had to be made. She turned to Lucas, who was waiting for her with an innocent smile, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions that was happening inside her. But, in that instant, his smile, the trust in his eyes, made something inside her falter. As she waited for the right moment to leave Lucas in that isolated place, Sophia felt her mind boil with doubts and thoughts she couldn't silence. Something inside her was stopping her from going forward, as if a sixth sense was warning her to stop and reconsider. In an attempt to calm her conscience, Sophia decided to investigate Lucas' past, believing that finding some flaw or imperfection could justify her plan. The more she delved, however, the more mysterious the boy's story became. It was on a silent night, while everyone slept, that Sophia decided to access old files her father kept stored. Richard, being a powerful businessman, had access to privileged information and confidential documents. Sophia rummaged through the papers, looking for something, anything that would disqualify Lucas and make the adoption a mistake. As she flipped through the documents, Sophia found a clue, a name, a vague reference to an influential family that made her heart skip a beat. She knew she needed to go deeper. The following days were a mix of anxiety and obsession. Sophia spent hours in the mansion's library, connected to social networks, obscure forums, and genealogy sites, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed increasingly complex. The information that emerged was fragmented, but indicated that Lucas was not just a street boy without a past. On the contrary, he seemed to be connected to an old and powerful family, whose name was whispered with respect and fear in the most closed circles of the elite. As she progressed in her investigation, Sophia discovered that the family in question had lost an heir many years ago. a boy who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances without leaving a trace. The connection between this story and Lucas was tenuous, but impossible to ignore. The dates, the places, the descriptions, everything seemed to fit in a way that Sophia could no longer attribute to chance. She began to realize that Lucas might be more than just an orphan. He might be the key piece to a puzzle that no one had been able to solve. The revelation hit Sophia like a hurricane. The idea that Lucas could have such a powerful lineage, that he could be the heir to an unimaginable fortune, was something she had never considered. Her mind, previously focused on removing him from her life, now struggled to understand the implications of this discovery. If Lucas was indeed who she suspected, it changed everything. Not just the perception she had of him, but also her cruel plan and the consequences that could come with it. As the pieces of the puzzle fit together, Sophia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Everything she believed, everything that justified her actions, began to crumble. The weight of her guilt grew exponentially as she realized how close she was to making an irreparable mistake. She understood that by trying to protect her own future, she had almost destroyed the future of someone who, ironically, was destined to have an even more grandiose life than hers. At that moment, Sophia realized she was involved in something much bigger than her petty rivalry for attention and inheritance. Lucas' presence in her life, once seen as a threat, now revealed itself as a complex web of destiny and history. The shock of the revelation left Sophia stunned, not knowing how to proceed. The certainties that once propelled her now paralyzed her, forcing her to face a truth that would forever change her perception of herself and the world around her. Sophia was sitting in her room, the laptop on her lap, while the words on the screen seemed to blur into incomprehensible smudges. The research she had started out of curiosity was now taking on frightening proportions. She read and reread the name of the family that, by all indications, was closely connected to Lucas, the Monteros, one of the oldest and richest dynasties in the country. The Montero fortune made her father seem modest in comparison, and the idea that Lucas might be the lost heir to this family was something Sophia could never have foreseen. The evidence was overwhelming. Official documents, old newspaper clippings, and records of the desperate search by the Monteros after the disappearance of their only heir, Gabriel Montero, when he was still just a child. The physical descriptions, the ages, the traits, everything pointed to Lucas. He was not just any street boy. He was Gabriel, the son that an entire family had searched for years. Each discovery made Sophia's heart beat faster until the truth hit her like a punch in the stomach. Sophia fell back into her chair, panic taking over her thoughts. Her plan to get rid of Lucas now seemed not only futile but dangerous. She wasn't dealing with a simple rival for her father's attention. She was dealing with someone whose importance went far beyond her understanding. If anyone found out what she had planned, not only would her reputation be destroyed, but her entire life as well. The name Montero was synonymous with power and influence, and she knew their revenge would be relentless. The initial shock gave way to fear. How could she have been so blind? How could she have let her jealousy and selfishness drive her to such an extreme? She thought of Richard, of how he would react upon learning that his daughter had almost destroyed the life of a boy who, in fact, was destined for such an important position. At that moment, everything seemed to fall into place cruelly. The attention Richard gave to Lucas, the way he seemed to see something special in the boy from the start, now made sense. Richard, even without knowing the truth, had felt something that Sophia, in her selfishness, never noticed. She had spent her entire life surrounded by privileges, but she never understood what it really meant to be part of something bigger than herself. Now that understanding came too late, and the implications were devastating. Sitting in her room, Sophia looked out the window at the vast garden that stretched beyond the mansion. The place that once gave her a sense of security now seemed like nothing more than a golden prison. Lucas, unaware of anything, continued his life in the mansion, but Sophia knew that time was running out. What she did next would not only determine Lucas' fate, but also hers. Every choice she had made up to that moment had led her to this critical point where any wrong move could mean complete ruin. Sophia felt the weight of her dilemma like a stone tied around her neck, slowly sinking her into a sea of anguish. Sitting in her room, she wondered what she should do. Continuing with her plan now seemed not only cruel but also suicidal, considering what she had discovered about Lucas. Confessing the truth to her father, on the other hand, would mean exposing the extent of her jealousy, her cruelty, and facing the consequences of her actions. It was as if a fierce battle was taking place inside her, where each choice seemed more terrible than the other. Sophia knew that if she decided to confess, she would destroy the image of the perfect daughter that Richard had of her, and perhaps lose the little that remained of his respect. But continuing with the plan, that could cost not only Lucas' life, but also her soul. She was trapped, and there was no easy way out. Now, for the first time, she was forced to confront the choices she had made, and the people she had hurt along the way. Every memory of a selfish act, every moment of indifference returned to haunt her. She thought of Lucas, of the trust he had placed in her, unaware of the danger he was in. He was just a boy, lost and alone, who had found a ray of hope in being adopted by Richard. And she, in her jealousy, almost destroyed that. The idea that her rivalry for attention and power almost cost Lucas his true family and inheritance was unbearable. Sophia felt nauseous, disgusted with herself. What had she become? Sophia walked to the window, looking out at the distant horizon, where the sky began to turn orange with the setting sun. The mansion, the estate, everything that surrounded her suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of the enormity of the choice she had to make. Sophia knew that the time had come. Every fiber of her being was tense as she walked through the long corridors of the mansion toward her father's office. The weight of the truth pressed down on her, making each step harder than the last. The path she had always walked with ease now seemed endless, as if the walls around her were closing in. Upon reaching the door, she hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to gather the courage she knew she needed. Entering the office, Sophia found Richard sitting at his desk, focused on papers scattered in front of him. The usually comfortable environment seemed colder at that moment, laden with a tension only she could feel. Hearing the door close, Richard looked up and stared at her with an expression of curiosity, unaware of the turmoil Sophia carried within her. "Father, we need to talk," she said, trying to keep her voice steady but feeling it tremble. Richard, noticing the seriousness in his daughter's tone, leaned back in his chair, waiting. Sophia began to speak with difficulty, each word coming out as if she were forcing a stone through her throat. First, she revealed the cruel plan she had devised against Lucas. She described how jealousy and the fear of losing her place in the family had led her to consider the unthinkable, abandoning Lucas in a remote place, leaving him to fend for himself. With each sentence, she saw Richard's expression change from curiosity to shock, then to something she had never wanted to see in her father's eyes: disappointment. When she finished describing her actions, Sophia felt an overwhelming silence fall over the room. But she wasn't done yet. With a voice barely audible, Sophia then recounted the discovery she had made, that Lucas was actually Gabriel Montero, the lost heir of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the country. Richard listened in absolute silence, his face growing more tense with each passing moment. The magnitude of what Sophia had revealed was so great that he seemed to need a moment to process it. Sophia, fighting back tears, waited for his reaction, knowing that her life was about to change forever. The disappointment in Richard's eyes was like a blade cutting Sophia from within. He stood up slowly, walking to the window where he remained silent, looking out as if seeking some answer in the garden's trees. Sophia stood there waiting, fearing what would come next. His silence was worse than any scream or reprimand. She felt the weight of the distance she had created between them, a distance that, at that moment, seemed insurmountable. Finally, Richard turned to her, and what Sophia saw in his eyes was even worse than she had imagined. It was not just disappointment, it was a deep sadness, as if he were mourning the loss of something precious. "I always knew you had trouble accepting Lucas," he began, his voice low and controlled, "but I never imagined you were capable of something like this." The pain in his voice made Sophia shrink inside. She wanted to say something to justify herself, but she knew there was no excuse for what she had done. Richard continued, each word striking Sophia like a blow. What you did, or rather, what you almost did, could have destroyed not only Lucas' life but also yours and our family's. You put everything at risk out of fear and selfishness. He paused, taking a deep breath as if trying to maintain control. Sophia, I love you, but right now, I don't know what to do with that. You have deeply disappointed me. His words fell on her like a sentence, and Sophia felt everything around her crumble. The silence that followed was unbearable. Sophia, unable to meet her father's gaze, looked down at the floor, feeling guilt and shame consume her. She knew she had lost something in that moment, something essential that she might never recover. Richard turned back to the window, and Sophia, feeling tears silently running down her face, remained still, waiting for the verdict that could define the rest of her life. Richard remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The weight of the decision he needed to make was evident in his posture. Sophia, still standing in the middle of the room, felt time drag painfully as she waited for her father's verdict. Finally, Richard turned to her, and his expression was one of seriousness that Sophia had rarely seen. Lucas will stay here, he began, with unshakable firmness. My decision to adopt him does not change. He is part of our family now, and I will do whatever is necessary to ensure he feels safe and loved. Richard's voice was calm, but there was a hardness in it that Sophia knew was non-negotiable. As for you, he continued, carefully measuring each word, I believe in second chances, but this time, things will be different. The idea of a second chance gave Sophia a spark of hope, but her father's tone quickly extinguished any relief. Richard made it clear that the path ahead would be difficult. You will have to prove that you deserve this chance. The trust I had in you has been broken, and only time will tell if it can be restored. Richard returned to his desk, but his gaze remained fixed on Sophia. I've already decided what you're going to do, he said, opening a drawer and taking out an envelope. You will get involved in something beyond yourself, something that will teach you the value of helping others without expecting anything in return. He handed the envelope to Sophia, who took it with trembling hands. Here are the details. You will start immediately, and there will be no discussions about it. If you truly want to redeem yourself, this is the way. Sophia opened the envelope and saw details about various community projects and social causes. Richard had carefully chosen each one, aiming to push Sophia out of her comfort zone and force her to confront the reality of less privileged people. Sophia's expression changed from surprise to a mix of fear and determination. She knew her father was giving her one last chance, and that failure was not an option. I understand, Father, she replied, trying to control the emotion in her voice. I will do whatever it takes. Richard nodded, but there was no softness in his gaze. I hope so, Sophia, he said, returning to his work, but with one final warning. This is not just to please me or to ease your guilt. This is for you to understand what it means to live in a world larger than your own. If you truly want to redeem yourself, you will have to prove day after day that you are capable of being a better person, not just for me, but for Lucas, and above all, for yourself. With these words echoing in her mind, Sophia left the office. She knew her father was right. The path he had laid out for her would not be easy, but she also knew it was her only chance to regain what she had lost. Sophia's first days in the community projects were a true ordeal. Accustomed to comfort and an easy life, she found herself immersed in a world that was completely foreign to her. The community center where she began working was in an underprivileged neighborhood, far from the luxury and security of the mansion where she had grown up. Entering the place for the first time, the smell of simple food and the sound of children running and laughing caused her a strange sense of discomfort and inadequacy. But there was also something more, the realization that she was where she needed to be. Initially, Sophia carried out her tasks with barely concealed reluctance, serving meals to homeless people, organizing donated clothes, and listening to stories of lives so different from hers was an experience that left her disconcerted. She felt the suspicious glances of other volunteers who noticed her hesitation, and in a way, this made her want to give up. But each time she thought about abandoning everything, she remembered her father's words and the look in Lucas' eyes. And so, day after day, she returned, trying to adjust. As the days turned into weeks, something within Sophia began to change. The initial discomfort gave way to a genuine curiosity about the people around her. She began to pay attention to the stories of those she helped, to the small victories and many daily struggles. Sophia realized that these people, although they had so little materially, possessed an emotional richness and resilience she had never known. Gradually, the work that was once just an obligation became a transformative experience. Sophia's internal change was not instantaneous, but rather a gradual process marked by small moments of epiphany. One day, while helping a young mother find clothes for her children, Sophia noticed tears in her eyes as she thanked her for something so simple. This moment shook her deeply, as she saw for the first time the real impact of her actions. The life that once seemed to revolve only around her own desires and insecurities began to gain a new perspective, a new purpose. Still, Sophia's internal struggle was constant. At home, the silence between her and Richard was heavy, full of unspoken things. And Lucas, though still cordial, maintained a distance that hurt her deeply. She knew she needed to prove to them, and to herself, that she was truly changing. Sophia threw herself into community work with an almost desperate intensity, hoping that somehow this could erase the mistakes of the past. But she also knew that redemption would not be something she could achieve quickly. It would be a long and difficult journey. Over time, the people around her began to notice the transformation. The other volunteers, who once saw her as a rich and distant young woman, began to respect her for her dedication. And Sophia, for the first time, felt that she was achieving something without the help of her father's name or the family's money. This feeling of personal accomplishment, though new and unsettling, began to fill the void she had always carried with her. However, Sophia still knew that her true test would come not just from what she did, but from how it would change her relationship with Lucas and Richard. Lucas' new life began as suddenly as the storm that brought his true identity to light. After the shocking revelation that he was Gabriel Montero, the lost heir of one of the most powerful families in the country, his reality changed drastically. Within days, he was taken from Richard's mansion and brought to the luxurious and vast Montero estate, a property that even made Sophia's surroundings seem modest. There, he was received with overwhelming love and gratitude. The Monteros, who for years had lived with the emptiness of loss, now felt complete again. And Lucas, still adjusting to his new identity, struggled to understand his place in that world. The transition, however, was not easy. Although Lucas was surrounded by comfort and affection, adapting to his new life was a constant challenge. He went from being a street boy, accustomed to the harshness of survival, to a young man surrounded by wealth and power. His days were filled with private lessons, formal dinners, and a rigorous education about the history and responsibilities of being a Montero. However, what truly made a difference for him was the emotional support of the family. They not only wanted him as an heir, but as a son, someone to love and protect. Lucas, over time, began to flourish in this new environment. His natural curiosity and sharp intelligence impressed his tutors, and little by little, he became more confident. He learned to behave in the elite social circles, but he never lost the humility and sense of justice that had been shaped by the difficult years on the streets. The shy and distrustful boy was giving way to a young man who understood the importance of his new position, but also maintained a deep respect for the life he had left behind. Lucas' influence extended beyond the walls of the Montero mansion. His connection with Richard was not lost, even with the distance. Richard frequently visited Lucas, and in these visits, he saw something special growing in the boy he had once rescued from the streets. Lucas, in turn, always saw Richard as a mentor and father figure. The relationship between them was marked by mutual respect, and Lucas often sought advice from Richard, especially on how to navigate the complex world he now found himself in. This relationship between Lucas and Richard did not go unnoticed by Sophia. Seeing the positive impact Lucas had on her father's life, something within her began to change. Lucas, unknowingly, was healing old wounds in Richard. rekindling in him a sense of fatherhood that Sophia had never been able to awaken. Lucas' influence also touched Sophia in unexpected ways. Despite the distance she initially maintained, she couldn't help but admire the strength of character he demonstrated. Lucas did not use his new status to boast. On the contrary, he remained humble, using his new opportunities to learn and grow. This made Sophia begin to reflect on her own actions and decisions, on what really mattered in life. Lucas' transformation from a street boy to a young heir was a mirror of Sophia's own journey, of someone who had to face their flaws to become better. Over time, Lucas became a bridge in the fragmented relationship between Sophia and Richard. His constant presence and example of resilience and humility served as a catalyst for deeper changes within the family. The reconciliation between Sophia and Lucas began slowly and hesitantly. Initially, both kept a cautious distance, each dealing with their own wounds and insecurities. Sophia, carrying the weight of guilt and regret, struggled to find the right words, fearing that any attempt at rapprochement might be misinterpreted. Lucas, on the other hand, although grateful for everything Richard had done for him, still harbored a certain distrust toward Sophia. But there was something undeniable between them, a silent connection that, despite everything, began to form. The first signs of change appeared on a quiet afternoon when Sophia, in a burst of courage, approached Lucas while he was in the garden, looking at the flowers. "Can I join you?" she asked, her voice hesitant but sincere. Lucas looked at her, surprised, but nodded with a slight smile. They sat together, in silence, for a long time, allowing each other's presence to speak more than words ever could. It was a simple but significant moment, the first of many that would begin to transform their relationship. As the weeks passed, small gestures of friendship began to emerge. Sophia began to ask about Lucas' interests, about his classes, and his new discoveries. Lucas, perceiving the genuineness in her questions, began to open up more, sharing stories of his new life, his fears, and his hopes. These moments, though brief, were like bricks that one by one built a bridge between them. Sophia felt a sense of relief as she realized that perhaps there was a path to reconciliation, even if it was still long and full of challenges. The relationship between Sophia and Richard also began to change. One day, while discussing the progress Sophia was making in her community projects, Richard looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. "You're doing well," he said, with a softness that caught her by surprise. "I know it's not easy, but I can see the effort you're making." These words, simple as they were, brought tears to Sophia's eyes. It was the first time, since the beginning of her journey of redemption, that she felt she was truly beginning to regain her father's respect and love. These conversations became more frequent, and with them, the bond between father and daughter began to strengthen. Richard, once so distant, now made a point of spending more time with Sophia, discussing not only business or her projects, but also life, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they were learning. Richard also noticed the positive impact Lucas had on this new family dynamic. Lucas, with his humble demeanor and generous heart, helped ease tensions, bringing a new perspective to everyone's lives. He not only adapted to his new life, but also became a sort of link, uniting Sophia and Richard in a way that previously seemed impossible. Richard, watching from a distance as his children, one biological and the other of the heart, began to understand and support each other, felt a silent pride grow within him. The house that once seemed cold and empty was now beginning to come alive again. Family meals, which were once fraught with awkward silence, became moments of sharing and laughter. Sophia and Lucas, who once could barely stay in the same room, now exchanged jokes and discussed their favorite books. Sophia's personal growth was a slow but profoundly transformative process. Each day she dedicated to community work and regaining the trust of Lucas and Richard. Something within her changed. Previously motivated by the fear of losing her place in the family, Sophia now acted out of a genuine desire to be a better person. She began to realize that the respect and love she sought could not be bought or demanded, but had to be earned through consistent and sincere actions. The lessons she learned at the community center, where she saw the value of empathy and humility, began to reflect in her daily attitudes. This change did not go unnoticed. Lucas, who initially kept a certain distance, began to trust Sophia more. He noticed how she strove to understand and help others, not out of obligation, but from a true desire to make a difference. Small gestures, like the way she spoke to people or the patience she demonstrated in difficult situations, began to earn Lucas respect. He saw in her a new version, someone who was rebuilding herself, and this touched him deeply. Richard also felt proud to see Sophia's transformation. He watched with satisfaction as his daughter, once so concerned with status and wealth, now valued things that really mattered. In their conversations, Sophia talked less about parties and shopping, and more about the people she met and the lessons she learned from them. She demonstrated a deeper understanding of life, something Richard had always hoped for, but had never seen in her. This growth brought a new dimension to their relationship, making Richard realize that, despite everything, Sophia was finally finding her true path. The changes in Sophia were not only internal, but also reflected in her appearance and behavior. The arrogance and superficiality that once defined her gave way to a more open and welcoming demeanor. She smiled more, but it was a different smile, more sincere, more approachable. Sophia discovered that by letting go of her pride, she gained something much more valuable: the ability to truly connect with the people around her. The walls she had built to protect herself were being torn down, one by one, and behind them emerged a stronger and more compassionate Sophia. The greatest revelation for Sophia, however, was realizing that true value in life was not in material things, but in the relationships we build and the people we choose to become. She began to understand that her happiness did not depend on the wealth she had always considered essential, but on the love and respect she received from Lucas, her father, and the people she helped. Sophia finally felt complete, not because she possessed much, but because she had found something that no amount of money could buy: a purpose and a genuinely transformed heart. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, as Sophia, Lucas, and Richard gathered on the mansion's veranda. The scene was simple but filled with a deep meaning that everyone felt, even in silence. The weight of the past had finally begun to dissipate, giving way to a sense of peace and unity that once seemed impossible. Richard, sitting between the two, looked at his daughter and the young man he now considered a son of the heart, and felt a quiet satisfaction. He had witnessed Sophia's transformation and Lucas' growth, and he knew that this journey had united them in a way that nothing else could have. As they talked about the small things of the day, from Lucas' adventures at his new school to the challenges Sophia faced in her community projects, there was a lightness in the atmosphere, a sincere connection that the three shared. Sophia, who once lived for herself, now dedicated herself to supporting Lucas in his new life and strengthening the bond with her father. She knew she had earned their respect, but more than that, she knew she had found her place in the family, a place she once did not understand, but now valued above all else. Richard, observing his children, felt that his family was finally complete. The journey had been arduous, full of challenges and moments of pain, but what mattered was where they were now. He saw in Sophia a strong and compassionate woman, capable of recognizing her mistakes and growing from them. In Lucas, he saw the courage and resilience that the boy had always demonstrated, even in the most difficult circumstances. And together, as a true family, they had overcome the barriers that separated them, finding a new beginning that was more solid and meaningful than any material wealth. As twilight advanced, Sophia found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about how her choices, once guided by selfishness and insecurity, had almost led her to lose what truly mattered. Now, she understood that forgiveness and love were powerful forces that could heal even the deepest wounds. It was Richard's love that kept her steadfast in her quest for redemption, and Lucas' forgiveness that gave her the chance to redeem herself. Life, she realized, was a series of choices, and the most important ones were not about power or money, but about the people we choose to become. Lucas, still adapting to his new life, felt a deep gratitude for everything he had received, but more than that, for the love and support that now surrounded him. He knew that his story could have been very different, but he was there, with a family that welcomed him and helped him find his way. He looked at Sophia and Richard and felt that, despite all the suffering he had endured, he had found his place in the world, a place where he was loved and respected, and where he could return that love sincerely. At the end of that day, as the stars began to shine in the sky, Richard, Sophia, and Lucas embraced, sealing what everyone knew was a new chapter in their lives. There were no more ghosts from the past, only the certainty that together, they could face anything. At that moment, they realized that the true value of life was in the right choices, not the ones that brought wealth or power, but the ones that strengthened the bonds that unite us, the ones that make us better and more capable of love. And so, they began a new journey, not as isolated individuals, but as a family, stronger and more united than ever. If you enjoyed the incredible story of Sophia and Lucas, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. If you love emotional chronicles and want to support our channel to continue bringing more quality content, consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to keep improving. Thank you for your support. See you in the next exciting chronicle.